What is up, everyone? I am Jill Reagan, owner here at Whispering Willow Farm, and welcome back. I'm in my greenhouse today. You can see I've got a plethora of little seedlings behind me, and today I want to talk to you about common seed starting issues, how to identify them, but also how to treat them. Now, I have an entire guide in my book, The Tiny But Mighty Farm, along with a lot of other references on growing from seed, starting from seed, and growing at scale in your tiny but mighty backyard. So if you are interested in my book, I'm going to put a link down below where you can grab it. But today we are covering these seed starting issues, what the issues are, the symptoms, and the treatment. So let's dive in. I will be popping photos up of plants for reference. I will say, thankfully, a lot of my seedlings are looking really great, so I don't have all of these deficiencies to be able to show you guys. But I will have a photo up here for you guys to reference. That way you can say, oh, yep, this is definitely what my seedling looks like. So that way you can identify and know for future references how to look for these. Now, some of these I'll kind of talk in more, but it might be specific to the variety that it looks a certain way and it's not actually a deficiency, but we'll hop into that more later. First up, we're going to talk about a nitrogen deficiency. This is very common in seedlings, especially if they've been in that same soil and they've depleted all the nitrogen out. A way that you can identify if there's a nitrogen deficiency in your little seedling is that the leaves will begin to turn yellow. So nitrogen deficiency is actually pretty common in seedlings. So you can see here on my spinach, my leaves are starting to turn yellow down here, the bottom leaves. That's pretty common. So if you notice this in your plants, don't fret. Wait until they set on that, true leaf. And then what you'll do is you'll just add a fertilizer. I do recommend finding a natural organic fertilizer. But one of the key things to take away is make sure you're reading the back of the label on that fertilizer. And just remember, with little seedlings, less is more. You can easily burn your plant up by adding too much. So it's not one of those things that you just want to fill up a pitcher of water and just chunk some fertilizer in there. Make sure you are reading those instructions pretty diligently, and I always go under what it tells me because I don't want to kind of risk burning up my plant and causing more damage that I actually can't fix later on. So the second seed starting problem that you might encounter is a phosphorus deficiency. Again, you're going to start noticing this in the leaves. They're going to put on purple discoloration. The tips of the leaves might turn brown, and you might have deep green leaves, and then the tips brown, or maybe it's just turning purple. This is a good indicator that your plant is suffering from a phosphorus deficiency. However, there are some varieties that it is going to take on that purple coloration because that is the actual variety. And so make sure you know that if that is what your specific plant is supposed to look like, it's fine. If it's not, though, that's when you can start to address it. So you can see here that we have some dark green and some purple going on. That is not what this tomato is supposed to look like. It's not a black from Tula or anything like that. So I just know that this is a phosphorus deficiency. And what you would do then is just add a bone meal or a blood meal. You can do a rock phosphate, manure, or a phosphate fertilizer to the soil. And you're just going to apply this at the root zone, which is just at the base of the plant. Make sure that you water it in really well. So this next common seed starting issue I can actually share with you, and that is a leggy plant. So a lot of folks who are starting their seeds indoors will deal with this seed starting problem, and that is because they're using artificial lighting, which is why I recommend if you are starting your seeds inside, hover that light right over, and as it begins to grow, you raise that light. However, that is time intensive. Sometimes people forget. Sometimes people don't rotate their seedlings to where there's getting adequate light from all around, and so what happens is, your plant starts reaching towards that light, going towards that light, which then creates this really thin, floppy stem of the plant that's not sturdy, and most of the time you just end up having to up pot that. And so what happens, just like this little seedling here, you can see super floppy. It does not have a really thick stalk on it, and you could tell that when I had this seedling inside, it was reaching and trying to grab to that light. So it's super tall before it ever even put on any true leaves. This is not ideal at all, and so since bringing these outside, I'm hoping that that is going to help with that. So if you are experiencing leg baggy seedlings, there are a couple things you can do. One, move the light closer if you're using some sort of artificial light. Another thing is that tomatoes specifically, they grow roots all along their stem. So what I could do would be up pot this and plant it super deep. So I could plant this into another thing of soil, and I could plant it right up to where the true leaf started, and then all of this is then just going to establish roots, and then from there on up, the top of the plant will become sturdy again, which is what I'm actually going to do just to ensure that I have the healthiest plants possible. So there are a few different options. I think the most immediate one, the thing that you're going to see that instant gratification on, is making sure you're providing better, more adequate light for your seedlings. Next up, we have got poor germination due to seed age or seed health. And I'm going to talk to you about what that looks like. So what is poor germination? It is literally just having seeds that do not sprout. So you guys can see here, I've got some germination, but then out of this 20 soil block, there's quite a few here that just never sprouted. So I'll be honest, very rarely do you have old seed. It is good practice just to look at on your seed packet packed for, that way you know the date that it was harvested and packed. However, it's more so, storing it properly. And so a lot of times some seedlings, specifically those spinach, they need that cold stratification. And what that means is that it experiences a cold period, and then when you plant it, it comes out of dormancy and it actually begins to germinate and sprout. So with that spinach in particular, I did not do this cold stratification period. I bought the seeds, I immediately brought them out to the greenhouse, and I started them. And because I didn't properly give that seed what it needed, I had really bad germination rate because of that. So something you can do if you're unsure if your seeds are too old is you can pre-germinate them, which means you're going to take a damp paper towel, put it in a baggie, sprinkle a few seeds on there, and see if you can get it to germinate that way. If you do get it to germinate that way, then you know that your seeds aren't too old. But before coming outside and planting a lot, or maybe starting, multiple trays of that, you might just want to do that test to see. So sometimes it could be because your seed is really, really old, but more than likely it's just because that seed wasn't stored properly for its, specifications. Now we're going to talk about poor germination due to improper planting. So we just talked about some of it may just be a seed issue. Some of it may be a gardener issue, and this is so common. So I want you to know, if you're a beginner gardener and you're having this difficulty, you are not a bad gardener. I cannot tell you how many times when I was starting out that I did not have seeds germinate and sprout because I didn't properly know how to plant them. This is a very, very easy fix, so be encouraged by this. If you know your seeds are good, you just bought them, you're storing them properly, and it's still not working, I think this might be a good resource to try to figure out if maybe you're doing this one step and you can fix this to ensure good germination, which is then later going to ensure a bountiful garden. So seeds contain enough energy for the seedling to sprout and grow to the soil surface, which you can see is happening right here, where they will begin to then photosynthesize and create more energy. But if you plant your seedling too deep, it may die before it ever gets to the top. So therefore it's using all of its energy just to break that soil surface that it actually doesn't sprout. So you can refer to the back of that seed packet to figure out how deep. A general rule is plant your seeds twice as deep as they are wide. But then also some seeds over here require light to germinate. So I've got all of these straw flowers that I'm not actually covering them at all because the light is required. So it could just be that you are covering a seedling that actually needs that light for germination. It could be that you are planting them too deep. But regardless, if either two of those are the option, there's an easy, quick fix for that. I do overhead water once my seeds have sprouted, but it is important to bottom water before those seeds have germinated, because if you're watering overhead with heavy pressure, you're going to push those seeds deeper and deeper into the soil, which means they're going to spend more of their energy just breaking that soil surface, and more than likely they're going to have used up all that energy and died before they ever make it there. Now, a lot of people say do not overhead water. We've got these little misters lined up that's just a really, really light mist. It's not heavy. It goes off frequently, and that works really well for us for automating things. But if you have the means to bottom water, and especially if you're growing your seedlings inside, bottom water, that way it's soaking up all the moisture from the bottom, it's not affecting anything from the top, and you're just gonna really ensure that your seeds are germinating and sprouting, and you're gonna have a successful season. Number 6 is poor germination. You guys can tell here, germination is key for quite a few things, and so germination due to the incorrect temperature can also play a part in not having successful seedlings. So for starting seeds, you're gonna need a good soil, you're gonna need good seeds, you're gonna need your trays, and a heat mat is optional. And the reason I say a heat mat is optional because your seeds are eventually gonna grow when it's reached that ideal temperature. But if it is colder, that is gonna slow your germination, especially for those heat-loving things like tomatoes and peppers. So I have moved my peppers out here into the greenhouse, and they're kind of struggling because I don't have a heat mat on. It's really cold here right now. My heater's only kicking on if it gets below, a certain temperature in my greenhouse. But the thing is, these peppers are gonna grow when it starts warming up and it's getting over 80 degrees in here. They're gonna start perking up, they're gonna start sprouting. But that is one thing to keep in mind, is if you are growing indoors and you have the means to provide a heat mat for those heat-loving things, they are gonna love that. But if you're growing things like lettuce and spinach and cold brassicas, they actually don't prefer it. They're gonna probably be stunted if you're putting them on a heat mat. So for me, my Salanova hates being on a heat mat. It slows germination down a ton. But my peppers want it. They need that. They like that extra heat. And so you are gonna have to know what it is that you're growing and its specific needs. Same with if you're growing a flower and it needs that light. The way you're gonna know this is by researching that seed. When you're either ordering from the seed catalog or ordering online, it's got growing information. It's got harvest information. It's got transplant information, especially if you're buying your seeds from a place like Johnny's, which is really geared towards production growing. It's gonna have so much detailed information. So I encourage you guys, make sure that you are reading that information. That way you're providing your plant with its best needs. But if it's not an ideal temperature, it is a bit too colder, know that you can add a heat mat for some supplemental heat. But more than likely, you could just wait until it warms up, and your seedlings are going to then start to germinate and sprout. Next up is white or green mold. Now, I'm going to be the first to admit that, hi, I'm Jill, and I deal with this seed starting issue every single year, and I've been growing food for over a decade. Why is that? That's because your soil is too wet. And that's because I am terrified that my seedlings are gonna die because I didn't water them enough. And so I overwater. It's an issue I always deal with, which is why I was so happy to be able to bring my seedlings out here and turn on this overhead mister system, because I know when I'm reliant on doing this, I have a tendency to overwater. And so I've got plenty of examples to show you guys what this looks like, but it is pretty easy fix as well. So when you start to notice, mine's always usually that green mold. When you mold on your soil surface, typically means that your soil is just too wet. And mold is just caused by a fungus that needs a moist environment to thrive. And so you can see here, I just overwatered these too much and it formed this little mold on top, which is, pretty common for me. It's usually always this green mold. It can look like white mold. You guys can see here, I'm even got some of it starting to develop on this eucalyptus here. And a lot of this happened when I was in the house. And I was just worried that they weren't, getting enough water. So like I mentioned, this is a pretty easy fix. You can use a fork. I've just got this little seeding tool here. And you can just scratch the soil surface like I'm doing right here. And this is going to increase aeration in the soil. So just go through, make sure you're not damaging the plant at all, but just scratch it up like that. Like I mentioned, this is a super easy fix. So just go ahead and scrape off that mold, let that good aeration start to happen in the soil. But then if you're growing indoors, add an oscillating fan. That way you've got some airflow going on. For me, I'm out in the greenhouse, so during the day, I've been raising up the sidewalls all the way. That way it's getting really good airflow in here. Not only am I strengthening my seedlings, and preparing them for when they go outside, I'm allowing good airflow, which is going to cause them to be sturdier, healthier plants in the long run. Yeah, if you're inside and you're planting them by a window, you could open up that window. But for me, you need some sort of good airflow, which is going to help with a lot of things, strengthening your seedlings and making sure that there's good airflow in your soil. Number 8 is dampening off. Here is a few photos of this. I actually went ahead and treated all of mine that were dampening off, and I want to tell you guys this. These are, seed starting issues that I still deal with. So I don't want to say be encouraged if you have crummy plants, but just know it's very common for you to have one or all of these issues. Even for someone like me who's been growing from seed for a long time, it's really easy to miss one step, overdo one step, and you've kind of thrown off the balance there. Just know it can be common. These are common seed starting issues, and just account for that. Don't be discouraged. Just immediately know how to fix it and treat it, and you can more than likely bounce back pretty quickly. So dampening off is a soil-borne fungal disease that affects your seeds and your little seedlings. The disease rots the stem and the root tissues at and below the soil surface. So in most cases, uninfected plants will germinate and come up fine, but then within a few days they become water-soaked and mushy and will just fall over at the base and die. So for me, I have this issue with my spinach. I'm really trying to nail down my spinach, but what will happen is you'll have a really, really thin stem, but then at the very, very base in the bottom, it'll just be mushy and rotted. Now, the bad thing is there is no cure for dampening off. Once your plant has dampened off, it's done. So it is unfortunate that there's no fix for dampening off, but there is a prevention that you can do, and that's going to be adding that fan in. If you're growing outside, maybe you're opening the vents or the doors to your greenhouse, rolling up the sides of your greenhouse, that air circulation is really going to help with this. And the last seed starting issue we're going to talk about is fungus gnats. Thankfully, this is not one that I deal with a lot, but I know many people, especially if they are starting their seeds inside, that really deal with this. So what they are is they're just these little mosquito-like pests, and they are super annoying, but they feed off of your soil is how they thrive and how they even find. I'll have people ask, well, how did the fungus gnat even become a thing? It finds your soil and it feeds off your soil. Sometimes they can be hard to spot, but if you're being really hands-on with your plants, you'll notice them, and you'll notice them real quickly, but there is a fix to get rid of them. Alright, so how do we get rid of this really annoying fungus gnat? We create an inhospitable environment for them to live in. Do this by letting our soil dry out. And so I've mentioned here, there's a lot of these common seed starting issues that come from overwatering, but there are very few issues that are going to come from underwatering. Granted, if you're growing indoors, or even for me outside, my greenhouse isn't getting so hot that a seedling's going to die in a day from underwatering, especially if you're going and growing your seeds inside. Granted, you don't want to go a whole week without watering your seedlings. That could result in, dead seedlings, but more of these problems are going to come from overwatering, and that means watering too much at one time or watering too frequently in one day. And so I'm always going to tell you guys, lean on the side of underwatering instead of overwatering, because less other issues are going to arise by underwatering versus overwatering your plants. So fungus gnat larva lives in the soil and needs that moisture from really wet soil. So if you let your soil dry out completely before you're watering, it will get rid of those larval gnats and discourage more adults from laying their eggs in the soil. So you can mix up a cup of water with 2 to 3 drops of a liquid dish soap and spray the top of the soil with this solution to kill the larva. And you can repeat this process every few days, or you can just scrape off and dispose of the top layer of soil outdoors. The eggs can still hatch, but by moving the soil outside and away from your seedlings, they will not cause issues to those seedlings. So there's a few different things that you can do. Again, the biggest thing would be make sure that you're managing your watering correctly. Again, this is something that's going to take a little bit of time. So again, it's just making sure that you are tending to your seedlings properly. I know overwatering is a very common thing. You want your little seedlings to sprout. You want them to thrive. And for many of us, we think water and light, sometimes heat. Those are the things required. But it is important to make sure that you're letting that soil completely dry out before you are watering. If you are just starting your seedlings, I do encourage bottom watering. That's going to help prevent a lot of these things. Once they have sprouted and germinated, an overhead mist is fine. Again, you're not wanting to use anything with a really hard nozzle that's going to potentially damage or break the stems or the stalks of your plants. So I hope this video was helpful. If there was a seed starting issue that I did not cover and that you are dealing with, please leave them in the comments below. I want everyone to have successful, abundant gardens this year, and that starts with beautiful, abundant, successful seedlings in your greenhouse or inside. So if you are dealing with some of these issues, be encouraged that most of them can be treated. And once you kind of start to identify the issue and know how to treat it, it will be less and less of a problem with each season that goes by. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you guys are just enjoying your time planting your seedlings and getting your spring and summer gardens ready. But thank you all for hanging out with me. I'll talk to you soon.